Your computer sets your new transmit frequency down there.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with him controlling your.
No, he doesn't control you.
Done by you, okay.
The only thing he controls is he sends you a report, and your receiver recognizes I've got a report, then it puts me down there. But it's your computer that moves you down there. Yeah, that probably is from a regulatory point of view, that might be important. He shouldn't have control of your radio. I don't know. Nobody would know, I guess, but anyway. Okay, so that's basically how FT8 de-expedition mode works. Just a few random comments here about FT8. It does give you basically error-free exchange of very simple messages. You either get the message that was sent or you maybe get nothing, but you don't get garbage. So it's a little different from PSK31 or RTTY or other digital modes that have little or no error correction built into them. If you get on the air and have even a reasonable signal, you can fill up your log really quickly, and it's addictive. People have a lot of fun with it. You get started and you can just make QSOs one after another. That's why some people that have liked doing things the old way say it's ruining ham radio, because you can do this sort of with one hand behind your back. It's really good for chasing DXCCs or states or locators or whatever you're interested in counting up for your log. It's good for low power. It's good for if you're in a situation where you can't put up much of an antenna. It'll work well with an indoor antenna, an attic antenna, a disguised flagpole or whatever. You don't need a big beam. And it astonished us and everybody else, I think, with how rapidly it became popular for use on HF and 6 meters, and even recently on higher bands as well. There's quite a bit of activity around this part of the country now on 2 meters. And during the January VHF contest, there was quite a bit even on higher frequencies. There are already some derivative programs that our software is all open source, so anybody can copy it and modify it and tweak it around and so forth. We thought that was important, and we've basically had good luck with that. And there's the JTDX is written by a Russian with a few guys helping him. MSHV is made by somebody in is it Bulgaria, I think. LS2HV. And we've had basically good cooperation with these guys. Once we persuaded them that it really wasn't cricket to get in to our not yet released development code and start publishing what we developed as your work. So, we had to kind of come down on them a little bit. And currently we release the source code whenever we publicly release a version of the program. All of its code is made public. But stuff that we have under development, we have one level of protection under. So you can't go copy that until because among other things, we play around with different possibilities of the number of bits and exactly how they're decoded and this and that. And until we make it final, we don't want it to be on the air, except maybe to make a few test contacts ourselves. So anyway, that's this one called JS8 call is of interest to some people because it allows you to string together a whole lot of sequential FT8 messages to carry on conversations that actually have whole sentences in them, or maybe whole paragraphs even. It takes forever, but you can do it, and some people have had fun doing that. Okay. Just a few more details of things. Now, basically up to this point, I've been telling you things that are a part of the protocol, the way we designed the protocol. And if you're going to write another program, maybe partly based on ours, but partly with some of your own ideas, if you're going to have it make FT8 QSOs, it will use the same protocol. Otherwise, it's not FT8. So, I mean, if you wanted to do that, everything I've said up to now basically has to do with the protocol. Now I just want to tell you a few things about the way that protocol is implemented in our particular program. It could be done some other way, somewhat differently. But we have included pretty good rig control now for more or less any radio made in the last 15 or 20 years, I guess. The ones that are 20 years old, usually don't have quite all the capabilities you'd like to have, but maybe the computer can set the dial frequency and interrogate the dial frequency and things like that. More recent ones are actually quite complete. It would be nice, of course, if Kenwood and ICOM and Yaesu and the K3 all use the same communication information, but of course they use completely different. So we have to have stuff in there for practically every radio. It's a pain in the neck, but it's worth it, I think. We have more or less encouraged having the use of our bands dictated by default frequencies that are in the program. So if you select 40 meters in FT8, it will set your dial to a 7074. There's no real reason why it has to be there, but we picked those frequencies after some significant amount of discussion with the community of users to pick a frequency that's good the world around and things like that. But other frequencies would also be okay. And the situation now is actually getting somewhat ridiculous, because if you tune across many of the HF bands these days, you get nobody in the CW band, nobody's talking sideband, but there are 1 million people in 3 kilohertz of FT8, which is, you know, it's nice in a way, but it's kind of stupid. So we may have to try to find a better way of doing that. At least we're going to have to get multiple 3 kilohertz segments to make people spread out. There's a big advantage, of course, in having a watering hole, because if you get onto a dead band and call CQ, if it was just anywhere, nobody would ever find you. But if you know, if there's a center frequency that anybody that was on would tune to, then you'll find them soon enough if the band is open for you.
Even if there are 3 or 4 of them, you do one, wait a minute.
Yeah, right, absolutely. So the decoder, unlike most of the other digital modes up to now, instead of just decoding the signal you're tuned to, it decodes everybody in the passband. And that takes a little bit of getting used to, but then it turns out to be very interesting and helpful. And so you can see where the band is open to. And of course, we've arranged things so that the full band is decoded over here, and only the ones around which you're actually tuned to or talking to show up on the right. So you can sort of have both perspectives available at any particular time. What else? These decoders, by the way, are really good, I say modestly. I'll tell you, when I retired in 2006, Princeton University was good to me and let me keep an office. So I'm there in the Princeton physics department every day, and I'm cheering on my younger colleagues, and I talk to the graduate students and so forth. But basically, much of the time I'm playing radio. Don't tell my department chair, but he knows. But anyway, so because what I've been doing is I do some physics still, but mostly I've been teaching myself communication theory. It's a lot of fun, and it's a deeply important piece of technology in today's world, as I'm sure you're aware. So information theory basically is, and it's mostly mathematics, but anyway, there's a lot of fun stuff in it. And these decoders are not easy to get right. And my close work with friend Steve Frank, Kilo 9 Alpha November, on FT8 and MSK 144, and the new mode that I haven't told you about yet, but I'm about to, are all done by Steve and me together. Steve is an electrical engineer in a department that does some of this coding and information theory stuff, although it has not been his own particular specialty. So to some extent, he and I have been teaching ourselves this important stuff as we go. And one of the other reasons why what we're doing is a little different than what has already been done by the professionals in this field is that we're working in a different regime of signal-to-noise ratio. We're trying to copy signals really close to the noise with the best possible accuracy and so forth. In commercial applications, you don't want to be that close to the noise. You want a little bit more, more generous signal levels to deal with. And so they don't have to worry about getting the last fraction of a dB of sensitivity out of it all. Did I see a hand in the back? Yeah.
Yes, about the forward error correction. Going back to that. for error correction, and if you're in full correction with the algorithm, you could be within a hundredth of a dB of just losing it totally. So do the decoders typically show you that it's operating in the correction mode, so you know that you're getting...
Oh, it's basically always in the correction mode, and the number of times you would actually copy every bit of the 174 bits that are transmitted with no errors. Maybe if the signal-to-noise ratio is above 0 on the scale we usually use, that might be typical, but most of the contacts you make have signal reports like -10 or -15. Those would always have a bunch of errors in them. But it's the forward error correction that means even though there are errors, there are not enough to make the decoding fail, and therefore the message comes out as though you have 100% copy.
Does it show you a measure of how heavy?
It does. It doesn't on the normal screen because most people aren't interested in that. But if you are interested, it gives you a log file in the log directory that, if you know how to read it, tells you all kinds of things. Steve and I spend a lot of time looking at those because that's where we make it better. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of touched on this. This might be a rookie question. But other than just making a contact, could you have like a small conversation over this FT8?
Yeah.
With someone?
Yeah, you can. And
get them through any other means all of a sudden?
Yeah, but if you try to do that on a busy band, they'll probably hang up on you and go work the next guy. Most of the FT8 conversations are rapid fire, just exchange call signs, thanks, you're in the log, go on to the next guy. If you want to have a conversation, yes, you can do it. It's not particularly well set up for that because you only have 2.5 seconds after receiving a transmission to generate whatever you're going to transmit next. So, it's not made for that. Yeah.
Oh, I remember last summer, occasionally I would get like a grid square that didn't make sense, but I figured out that for some reason it was reporting the grid square on the direct opposite side of the planet.
Yeah. That was an earlier version of FT8, which we had made so that it could do some things for North American VHF contests, like sending rover calls and things like that. So we figured, well, if you're working a VHF contest, you're never going to work somebody in Australia. So we can use all those grids over there to mean something else. And we did that for a while. It was not very successful for exactly the reason you pointed out, that it meant you would sometimes, some guy would forget to put his program into contest mode, and so it would display these ridiculous looking grid squares. That was not helpful.
When the Fox selects a frequency other than the standard in the watering hole, how do you get your radio onto that frequency? So in other words, instead of 10.136, he's on 10.131.
Oh, well.
And you go there and the protocol.
Well, let me finish, but I will come back to that because that's an important question. I want to flip the slides back. Anybody else got something to ask about right here? Because I'd like to get through the next few minutes. It's already 8 o'clock and I'm going to be given the hook before too long, probably. All right. Just a few more things here. It was fun to operate in this year's ARRL RTTY contest. And just for fun, I put here the number of logs that were submitted in single operator low power, single operator unlimited low power, high power, and so forth in 2017, 18, and 19. Look at what happened in single operator unlimited low power. An extra 1,000 logs were submitted over the last couple of years. Those are all FT8, because FT8 necessarily was always put into the unlimited category because basically it's a multi-decoder. It's like using CW skimmer or something, which in the ARRL contest has usually been called assistance of some sort. And anyway, the high power also increased by a lot over the last few years. That also is because of FT8. So there are, not quite twice as many logs in the RTTY contest this year because people got on and used RTTY. Now, they had fun using RTTY, but they didn't quite, I had a lot of fun. I made a good score, but I couldn't compete with the good RTTY operators because they were making QSOs at a higher rate than you can do with 4 15-second transmissions. That means your maximum QSO rate is about 60 an hour. And maybe you could push it a little bit, but not much. And a good RTTY operator can make maybe twice that, at least some hours. So we started thinking about what else would you do if you wanted a really capable contesting mode that has some of these other advantages of FT8. So we're talking now about a mode that would use only 4-tone frequency shift keying instead of 8. So tentatively, we're calling it FT4. It's supposed to be faster, better, and cheaper than RTTY. It is faster. We'll find out if it's better or not. It's cheaper in bandwidth by a lot. RTTY signals are actually pretty ugly, and you've seen them on your radio. I'll show you a spectrum of one in a minute. So anyway, like FT8, the FT4 has the same message types, so 77 information bits, the same code. The transmission duration, instead of being a little over 12 seconds, is a little bit over 4, so it's almost 3 times faster. So instead of maxing out around 60 QSOs an hour, this mode would max out around 180, 3 times that. Okay, so that's good. What do you give up for by making the transmission so much shorter? Well, basically that means you've got to send the information faster. That means the bandwidth will be larger. And we cut back how much the bandwidth would expand somewhat by going to 4 tones instead of 8 tones. But still, the bandwidth is 90 hertz instead of 50 hertz. And the signal-to-noise ratio limit, instead of being around -20 or 21, is around -16 or 16.5. Okay, so you give up a little bit. But still, at -16, that still means you can work a lot of people, even with low power and a compromised antenna. Just to calibrate these things, a very weak CW signal is around 0 on this scale. So a really good operator, say, that's used to doing moon bounce on VHF bands, can copy CW, maybe with a lot of repeats and so forth, down to around around -15, -10 anyway. But a typical CW signal that you would give an S2 or something to, that would be closer to 0. You can't hear this signal, so this is below the audible limit. Okay, so just for fun, here are a couple of comparative spectra. This is what a RTTY spectrum looks like. It's 170 hertz apart from the 2 frequencies, but long skirts. So if you go down 30 dB, it's already this wide. If you go down 60 dB, it's a couple kilohertz wide. And that's what so a big RTTY station, say running a lot of power, big antennas, if he gets on during a contest and has a run frequency, he commands a kilohertz or more. And you better not get in there, because you will never be copied by anybody. FT4, on the other hand, is only this wide. It's 90 hertz wide up here. It's only about twice that, or 2.5 times that, even down here at -80 dB. So we have intentionally made the spectrum very tightly controlled. That means that a lot of FT4 signals can fit into a 3 kilohertz passband.
That would be RTTY FT4. RTTY FT4.
No.
RTTY versus FT4.
The red is RTTY.
Okay.
The blue is FT4. Okay. Here's what the waterfall spectrum on WSJT-X looks like with FT4 signals. Now, I have to tell you, FT4 has not been released, so those are not all real signals. Those are simulated signals. But Steve, Frank, and I have worked each other lots of times on this mode already, so we know how it works. And I regenerated these in software to get a picture of what they look like. FT4 is different from all of the other WSJT-X modes in that it does not have required start times and receive times. It doesn't have a fixed cycle of transmitting and receiving. So it receives all the time until you hit F1 or some other key to send a message, and then it sends that message, and then it stands by and listens again. So notice that these signals start any old time. They don't all start on a marker. They can start any time. So it's, in a sense, I think we thought of this anyway because we wanted to see how well we could make this work compared to the timed modes, which all of the other WSJT-X modes are. They all have sequencing built into them. So FT4 would not require that your computer clock be set accurately to UTC. It doesn't care. So another thing we had in our mind, though, was since we were trying to make this mode sort of like RTTY but better, we wanted something that the RTTY operators would find easy to use. And so this will work the same way they're used to working. In fact, we can make, and probably will at some point if this mode sees the light of day, we will probably make a FT4 engine that plugs into N1MM and other contesting software, so you can do the same sort of thing you do with RTTY. Okay? So anyway, here's a couple of contacts between me and Steve Frank, K9AN, and Bill Somerville, G4WJS. He's the third programmer that is sort of the most heavily involved in the recent developments of the program. Steve and I have worked primarily on the codes and the digital signal processing and the user interface. Bill works very hard on the rig control stuff, and he's very good at that. And Bill is also very good at generating the eventual packages that allow you to use this software across all of the popular platforms, Windows, Macintosh, Linux. It works well on all of them. And Bill should get a lot of credit for making sure that that's the case. Okay, I'm just going to finish up by giving you a picture of the signal-to-noise ratio limits that typically apply to these weak signal modes. To have a single sideband conversation with somebody, even at sort of S2 levels, you need, on this scale, in that bandwidth, you need a signal-to-noise ratio above 0, maybe around plus 10 dB. For MSK 144, that's the mode that we use for meteor scatter, particularly on 6 and 2 meters. That gets down below the noise by maybe 8 dB or so. The very best CW operators can get down to maybe 10 to minus 10 to 15. Then we've got FT4, FT8, and the other modes down here to Whisper, which is the champion of all of these. I should mention also that we're working on another mode that would even go off the bottom of this slide, that would get down to maybe something like more like minus 35 dB, particularly for the people that have been playing around with the new bands below the broadcast band, the 470 kilohertz and 137 kilohertz bands. And those people, so far, they're enough participants to make it fun. There are people to work, but not so many that you have to make fast QSOs. So they don't care if the QSO takes 15 minutes or so. That means we can make the bandwidth smaller and the messages go out more slowly. That's how you get down into this part of the spectrum. So I think that's basically what I brought with me, and I thank you all for your attention. A few more questions now. You were asking me something about that I wanted to
The top station goes off the normal frequency.
Yeah.
How do you get your radio onto his frequency?
Yeah, so, and this is the band selector control. You can just put your cursor in there and type in the frequency that you want.
All you have to do is type it in there.
14.090 or whatever it is. That's all you have to do. Yeah.
These guys don't tell me that.
I could say, read the blank blank manual.
The frequencies and try to change a box.
Yeah.
Just type it in there.
Yeah, you can actually, if you're on 14074 and you want to go to 090, you can put in 090K for kilohertz. It'll do that. But to be sure, put it in megahertz, 14.090. And I should say, I made a crack about the manual, but the manual is an issue. The manual is, what is it, 100 pages or something? It's not that easy to just sit down and read it. So you have to, when you're in a panic, you have to go there and look. Bring up the manual, use your browser's search to look for some keyword. You'll get there. The manual is pretty thorough, and I think it's accurate, but it's a lot. Yeah.
Two things. JT Alert is a great add-on.
Yes.
The other question, I think we passed the deadline for people to convert from the 71 to the 77 bit.
Yeah.
How has that been going?
The question was about the transition. We modified FT8 so that it was, when we went up to the 77-bit message, And at that time, it was essential that you upgrade to the latest version of the program because it couldn't talk to earlier versions. That transition was, we began to talk about it and give even specific dates when things would happen back last fall around September. The changeover date was December 10th. We were ready for chaos, and it worked fine. Everybody did what they were told almost. And within a week, everybody was using the new version. It was really great. We were delighted. The ARRL was helpful. They put up messages on the league website a couple of times, but it really went very well. Yeah.
I was just curious, how would you position this to attract the interest of either a young or an experienced software engineer who, does internet stack and open source, they're all versed in this stuff, but you talk about, this communication stuff, and they kind of go like this. Their eye goes, cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo.
I think
transcend that.
Well, I think these digital modes have been attractive to youngsters because they're into computers anyway, so they do that sort of stuff quickly. Whether it will get a lot of people interested in the actual internals and the coding and decoding and so forth, I think that's pretty specialized, and that may attract a few. And we know we've got now a development group that's a dozen or so people. Of those, I mentioned the 3 who have been the primary contributors for most of the code that's actually in the program, but we have a lot more who have contributed bits and pieces here and there, which are very good at doing thorough exercising of new versions to try to break it, basically, and find out where the bugs are. So that's been extremely helpful. We have a bunch of people who've been doing translations of the manual. You can now get the manual in, I think it's 11 different languages. It's great. So that's one of the things that's helped to get it accepted around the world. The number of, the club log statistics that I was quoting at the beginning included a couple of interesting numbers. There were 287 different DXCC entities active last year, and 270-something, 76 or something of those were active on FT8. That's pretty impressive for a mode that's only a year and a half old. Yeah.
Could you say something about moon bounce? It's probably naive, but if I want to try moon bounce for my balcony now, would I be able to do it?
Yeah, you could. I stayed away from moon bounce tonight, even though it's been a real interest of mine over the last 20 years, just because I wanted to concentrate on these other things. Yeah, if you, the best band to work somebody with a small antenna on is probably 432, 70 centimeters. And there are big stations in Europe. HB9Q is one of them. He's got a fairly sizable dish. And he loves working single Yagi stations with 100 watts or less. And if you've got, if you can see the moon off your balcony and have a 6-foot-long Yagi on 432, you can work him. And
100 watts?
Yeah, with 100 watts.
Outstanding.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
So, first a comment. Actually, a year and a bit ago, December 2017, I was a technician with an HF radio. I wanted to do some digital stuff. And okay, so I can do that on 10 meters in December. Like, this band is dead.
Yeah.
I opened up WSJT, and I managed to contact this guy, K1JT, who was just...
All right, cool. All right. I wonder why I was there. But I'm glad I was.
I had a question.
Yeah.
FT8, had its genesis when we were going well down into the solar cycle and has gotten massively popular when we're really in the bottom.
Yeah.
What's in 6 years? Is PSK Reporter just going to melt down?
I wonder, or maybe people will get tired of it and go back to sideband or something. It's hard to say. I guess time will tell. We don't know. Yeah.
If we're doing moon bounce, do I have to set my computer's clock a little bit ahead to compensate for the...
No, the program knows that there's actually a box to check which says insert EME delay. It's only 2.5 seconds, and in any case, when you're working JT65, which is what you would use for moon bounce, it searches from about -2 to +5 seconds, so you'll probably get him anyway, but it's best if you're doing moon bounce to, again, look in the manual under EME, and it'll tell you to check that one box that extends the positive delays by a little longer. Yeah, okay.
Joe, as I said before we started, I wondered if I could offer just one comment on the user interface.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important one. The program seems to give kind of like it shortchanges the notion that you're transmitting during one interval, receiving during another. So instead of having just the little checkbox that says TX even, I think everybody knows what it is. It's centrally located there. I kind of think it should be Windows radio buttons saying odd and even. And there's another part of that reason there. It's kind of like if you have only one box to indicate a binary function, it's either this or this. Then it's kind of like that question of proving, let's say, does God exist? So a checkbox means God exists, and nothing means God doesn't exist. You see what I mean?
All right.
And then let me finish very quickly. So I'd like to see an uneven button. I'd like to see the waterfall in its various gradients say odd or even, so that you know who's transmitted. And then I'd like to see the overall bandwidth window say, guess what? This is the last 15-second received interval, and it happens to be odd. And then up top is whatever is the reverse interval.
One of the reasons this program is open source, one of the reasons the program is open source is so that anybody can bugger it up however they like and make all these little tweaks, and you're welcome.
One or two final questions.
Okay, one in the back.
60 meters?
Yeah. What about it?
Yeah. None of the new versions have anything with 60 meters built in.
Oh, 60 meters. I don't think 60 meters is a great band for digital stuff. You know, you can do it. You're limited to those fixed slots, and there aren't very many of them. Some people have used FT8 there. Some people have used Whisper there. We have not put a default frequency in the program because there isn't any frequency that would be legitimate worldwide. So if we put in one that's legitimate in the U.S., the Europeans will complain, and vice versa. And we're good at getting complaints. We get lots of them. Okay, one more question maybe. Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of background other than the digital modes on what you've done? I was in Puerto Rico a bit ago and saw at Arecibo what you had done and gotten your prize for it. Just give us a little bit, because there's some people here who aren't.
Well, I mean, don't get me started. I'll talk for another hour. Professors are programmed to speak for 50 minutes, you know. So if I.
Nobody else in the building.
So all right. So the Nobel Prize was for the discovery of an orbiting pulsar. A pulsar is a neutron star, a star made not of atomic matter like the sun, but of nuclear matter. So it's like taking atoms and crushing them down to the size of the nucleus. And an atom is way bigger than, the cloud of electrons around the nucleus is most of the space. So if you make a star like the sun into a neutron star, it's only 10 miles across. A teaspoonful of neutron star matter would on Earth weigh about 1 billion tons. This is really dense. Anyway, so there are lots of interesting things about a neutron star. Was first hypothesized in the 1930s, soon after the neutron was discovered as an atomic subparticle. But it was not known that it would actually exist. It seemed like the laws of physics would permit such things to exist. They were not actually discovered until the 1960s, when we were able to put satellites into orbit carrying X-ray detectors and things like that. And we first got signals then from things that looked as though they were consistent with being made of nuclear matter. Pulsars were discovered in the late 1960s. A pulsar, I said, is a neutron star. It's strongly magnetized and it spins rapidly. If you spin a magnet, you've made an electrical generator. So pulsars generate huge electrical fields above their magnetic poles. That generates radio noise, and a spinning radio noise beacon is like a lighthouse. So if you're located in some direction over here in space on the Earth, and a neutron star goes around like this, whenever it's pointed toward the Earth, you might get a blip of radiation, a pulse. Yeah, when it's pointed at you. And so pulsars are impulsive sources of radio noise. They keep time very accurately because this thing is spinning freely in space, no friction or anything to slow it down. So pulsars keep good time. And I started this project when I was an assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts. I talked a graduate student into working on it with me, and we shared the Nobel Prize 19 years later. That's a pretty good way to start your professional career. Not bad. But anyway, we had basically what we did was design a pulsar detecting machine that used what we then called a mini computer. It was something about the size of a refrigerator and weighed about 800 pounds, and we had to air freight it down to Puerto Rico from Massachusetts, but we had programmed it to detect these impulsive signals. And we were fortunate enough, I realized that one of the really important things which hadn't been done was to find a pulsar orbiting around some other object so that we could measure Doppler shifts and therefore get an indication of its mass. And we did not imagine what would actually turn out to be the case. That not only did we find that, the orbit was very tight. It goes around the other star in about 8 hours. So 3 times a day, this thing goes around the other object. So it was clear that this was probably 2 neutron stars, one of which we detect and the other one we don't, but they must be that because an ordinary star like the sun wouldn't fit in this orbit. And furthermore, the velocity of the motion of the orbit was huge. It was 300 kilometers per second maximum. That's about 1/10% of the speed of light, so that relativity is important. Ordinary Newtonian physics would not explain this orbit, but relativistic physics does, Einstein's theory. And what this enabled us to do over time was to establish that this system was radiating gravitational waves. You may have remembered the splash in the newspaper 2.5 years ago when a group at Caltech and MIT detected gravitational waves with a big instrument that cost $500 million. That instrument would never have been funded if our experiment had not worked, because basically we showed the U.S. National Science Foundation that these guys were not chasing a will-o'-the-wisp. There was actually, we proved that gravitational waves actually exist. So that's what they... The telescope, what we wanted to use was the biggest radio telescope that we could get our hands on, and that's the one in Puerto Rico. It has some limitations. The dish is fixed, attached to the ground. You steer it by moving the feed antennas around. So it has limited steerability, but this really nice relativistic pulsar goes straight overhead in Puerto Rico. So we could measure it for a few hours every day. It was a relativity experiment handed to us on a silver platter, if you like. It was really great. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
It was great to be here with you.
Joe, on behalf of the club, okay, we never leave without a gift. So,
okay.
On behalf of the club, okay, our thanks to you for your presentation tonight. We're really honored to have you here.
Okay, this was really great.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you all for coming. This is very handsome. Nice to be with you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You bet.